Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this special Zoom seminar with Monica Miller, who is the attorney who's going to be arguing on behalf of Happy in this historic case happening on May 18th. And we also have Lauren Chaplin, who is the Director of Communications, who'll be asking Monica a couple questions about how she's preparing and what arguments we're putting forth. So I'll hand it over to you both.
Thank you, Nikki. So I first wanted to you can see me, right? You can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, good. A reminder that arguments are on May 18th in Albany, New York at New York's highest court. And we will be live streaming the hearing and our rally that's going to take place before the hearing at freehappynow.com. So that's sort of the hub for everything. But we also encourage people to join us that day because showing our support, getting real loud about the message we're trying to send to the courts and beyond, that elephants don't belong in zoos and that Happy deserves the right to liberty. The more people with us that day, the better. So yeah, freehappynow.com is where you can find information on what we'll be doing that day. So yes, and hi, Monica, it's good to see you. I look forward to seeing you next week. Yeah, so I hoped you could begin by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background professionally, and how you came to work for the NhRP.
Sure. Well, thanks, Lauren. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My background is that I live in California. I went to law school in Vermont Law School after graduating from Columbia for my master's degree in environmental science and policy. And before that, I graduated from Pitzer College with an environmental studies major. So I've got a lot of environmental background, and a large part because they never really had like animal law or animal rights related majors kind of back when I was in school. But of course, protecting the environment includes animals. And I've always been passionate about saving animals since I was a kid. You know, I grew up with a best friend whose family was kind of a hippie family out here in Northern California. And they had just kind of like chickens and goats, but as pets, and they just kind of free roamed around, and the family was vegetarian. And, you know, like I was in third grade, we were taking a bath with the baby chicks, my friend and I, and her mom, you know, enlightened me about what chicken nuggets were. And I was horrified, as probably a lot of third graders would be when they're like holding a baby chicken and come to the reality that that is also food to people. So I, you know, came home crying and I'm going to be a vegetarian. And then like, I think I started watching like PETA videos circa, I don't know, in the 90s when I was a kid, and kind of traumatized myself, but also tried to enlighten my classmates. I think when I was in like 8th grade at Catholic school, I did some sort of anti-vivisection protest that my science teacher still remembers. We connected on Facebook. So I've always been passionate about saving animals, but like specifically sort of in the rights realm, because it was apparent to me quite early on that statutes, you know, codified law is grossly inadequate. You know, it still permits for a wide range of abuse. And I realized that the law, even kind of as a kid, that it was treating animals as inanimate objects and not as living, sentient, you know, creatures. So yeah, that's kind of
it's long-winded. Real quick that it's so powerful that you were willing to turn towards the issue and not away at such a young age. Like most people go their whole adult lives without doing that. So that's really commendable and amazing. And I wondered too, if you knew that early that you wanted to be a lawyer, or did that evolve over time?
You know, I was kind of one of those kids where my parents always said, like, you'll be a lawyer, because I just was I've always just stood up for what I think is right and just, you know, don't back down from that. And, you know, when it came to my parents, if like, even if it was something like a curfew rule, but if it was like unjust or arbitrary, like I just feel like I think I've had a strong sense of justice, but I did not want to be a lawyer. And I never pictured myself like, well, you know, as a young person, and I didn't have like people, you know, saying you should be a lawyer outside of that. But once I was in college, I knew I wanted to do animal rights. And then I figured I'm not the tree hugging type of person. And I felt like law school would be a place where, you know, there was, I think, a few programs at the time, Vermont Law School, Lewis and Clark, and I think Hawaii Berkeley might have had a couple animal law programs back in 2008 when I was graduating from college. But then I got into the Columbia program, so I did that. But once I understood that animal law was, like an area and that I could potentially change laws in that, I felt that was where I should go. So that's why I picked Vermont Law School. I talked to the director of my program at Columbia, and I was like, which programs would be good for, saving animals? And he actually was the one that said, we've had a few students go to Vermont, because I was like, I'm a California girl, so like, what am I going to do in Vermont? But my mom actually had gone to Bennington College, and she was really excited about the idea of me going to Vermont. So, and actually that Steve had taught at Vermont Law School. I just never took any of his classes, but I'm really grateful that I did make it up there, because it kind of positioned me on the East Coast and allowed me to join the ranks of NhRP and be really involved with our early cases and stuff.
And how did that come about?
So yeah, when I was in law school, my first year, of course, I joined the ALDF, our Animal Legal Defense Fund chapter, and became a co-chair. I also started a secular law student association, because we needed, I felt like there was sort of a gap in our college. There was a lot of religious groups, but I felt like there was not one that was for church-state separation. So I got involved with ALDF, and I went out to the Animal Law Conference in Lewis and Clark, where Steve was actually lecturing. And it was my first year. And I was like, this is exactly what I went to law school to do. He was just giving a presentation. I think it was before he had assembled really a team. I think there was a few folks that a few law students that he was working with. Liddy, I think, was already someone that was on the team. And so I reached out to him after the presentation, and then was like, I'm really interested. This is like exactly what I want to do, like change the law. So I was like, I need to work with this professor. And then he actually like ignored my email, I think the first time, or it got lost or something. But then like maybe 6 months later, I was in animal law class, and I emailed him, and I was like, I want to do my paper on something that would be helpful for your group or for your project that you're working on. What could I do that wouldn't reinvent the wheel? And he was like, oh, that's exciting. How about equality? So I actually did a really big deep dive on like common law equality and how it could apply to animals, all while I was in law school. And then he, took me on as a volunteer. And then when I graduated from law school, Steve had offered me a position to be, I think it was like the first attorney like on staff, because I think Natalie was our executive director then. So I've been with NhRP basically since its fledglings when he was assembling the team. So yeah, I feel really, this feels like, really momentous to be able to do this case.
We're going to talk more about that in a moment, and we're going to return to, the work you do on separation of church and state with the American Humanist Association. So we're going to come back to that. But I wonder if you, since you mentioned common law equality and the role that plays in our cases, maybe we can drill down a little bit into Happy's case and what makes it so monumental, what we'll be arguing, what we expect the other side will be arguing, and there's more questions from there. And just for everyone watching as well, like we're going to take questions from you, which you can leave in the chat, and we'll scoop them up, on the tail end of the discussion. So so I just lobbed a lot of questions at you, but do you want to talk about what we're arguing in Happy's case and what makes this moment so historic?
So in Happy's case, which I think probably most folks on here are familiar with who Happy is, but she is an Asian elephant who is basically in solitary confinement at the Bronx Zoo. She's in a 1-acre pen, but she spends most of her time indoors, and she's isolated from other elephants. During her 4 decades at the Bronx Zoo, she's really only had contact with 4 elephants total. And as we know, elephants are very, have extremely high emotional and social intelligence, and especially female elephants. When they're born, they stay with their pack for life, like their cousins and their sisters. They never separate. They have permanent female bonds, and I think that's just really sweet. And Happy, if she hadn't been stolen or kidnapped from her native Thailand, she could be a matriarch herself and be leading a pack of women through her ancient migratory routes, but instead she's imprisoned for no reason. We have sanctuaries that are willing to take her free of charge, that have, it's hard to sometimes conceptualize the difference, but when you think of 1 acre versus 2,000 acre sanctuaries where there's just rolling hills and the elephants can choose which elephants they want to hang out with. They can choose which hill they want to go on. They can see different grasses and eat different things and forage and roam and be like elephants rather than see the same thing day after day after day. And we're seeing the evidence of the harm that captivity is doing to Happy through the most compelling expert affidavits I've ever read. I mean, like, we have Joyce Poole, Dr. Joyce Poole, who's like, you know, I don't want to diminish her by saying she's like the Jane Goodall for elephants, but it's, you know, we also have Dr. Jane Goodall as an affiant for our chimpanzee cases, but she really is like, she's been studying elephants for decades and she's observed Happy in videos and she's made it very clear that Happy is engaged, you know, is showing signs of really, like, you know, the problems with captivity. She's engaged in stereotypic behavior and swings her trunk. And anyway, so it's really horrific. And we're using the common law of New York, which is the judge-made law, to make a case to the highest court of New York that it has a duty under its jurisprudence to update its common law when there's a substantial injustice and when there's something that, you know, when the law is outmoded. It's their law, so they have the obligation to update it. So we're basically presenting all these reasons, you know, as a matter of equality. Happy is proven to be autonomous. She's proven to have a, you know, will and interest in being free. And that really what our scientists, we have 5 world-renowned scientists, the top of their field in elephant science, saying that her interest in exercising her autonomy is as fundamental to her as it is to us. So the New York courts can't say that they care about autonomy on the one hand, and then say that Happy isn't entitled to her freedom. Because really then what they're saying is we don't really care about autonomy, we care about human. And that really undermines all of the precedents from decades, you know, going back to some of the court's first cases where they talk about, you know, in the you know, paramount importance of autonomy and free choice to the common law values, as well as just equality as a concept. You have 2 groups, you know, humans and elephants, that are similarly situated for the purpose of habeas corpus, meaning that they both have an interest, doesn't have to be the same interest, but they both have an interest in exercising their autonomy. And so when you're denying one group that right and giving it to another for no reason other than saying this one's an elephant, that defies equality in its own right too. So we have several kind of principles that we're espousing to get the court to see the injustice and the necessity of its role in correcting the injustice. The lower court, for instance, said that this is you know, better suited for the legislature, you know, that the legislature should handle this. It's too complicated. And what they're really saying is, you know, I think there's a little bit of confusion, maybe what we're arguing, but I feel like they're letting the other side's arguments kind of come into play about, oh, you know, this parade of horribles, if you grant it for one elephant, you know, what's next? The courts are going to be clogged up with cows and chicken petitions. And so that's kind of one of the hurdles we're overcoming in this appeal. But there's a long line of cases that say when you're using the common law, it's case by case. The court really even can't consider these other situations. And more importantly, the court's job, unlike the legislature, is to administer justice. That is like its role. So you would be, you know, disavowing your role as a court to say that someone's common law right to bodily liberty is a better matter for the legislature. So there's a lot of kind of these hurdles we have to overcome, but that's, yeah, what I've been doing to sort of prepare for the argument.
Oh yeah, and I want to get into the nitty gritty of what the prep looks like too, because I know it's been hours and hours every day, nonstop since we've
I'm a little tired. I've got my Red Bull and my water sort of double fisting here.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for articulating that so well. And I wanted to ask a couple of follow-up questions about it, which, if I'm not mistaken, the Bronx Zoo and the Wildlife Conservation Society, which manages the zoo, they claim that there is no precedent, that the courts have already ruled against us. And so I know that's wrong. We know that's wrong. But can you weigh that claim against the centuries of precedent under New York common law that we refer to? How is it that, yeah, could you speak to that?
Totally.
Okay.
So the ruling that we are grappling with is a ruling that came out of our chimpanzee litigation in New York, where we had the first Department of the third department in New York, which is an appellate division, so an intermediate court, saying that in order to be a legal person, you have to be able to shoulder duties. So they define legal person to be one who has to bear legal duties and rights. And the law is very clear that, like, just by definition, like, a legal person is one who can bear duties or rights, because there's plenty of individuals like children and people that are like mentally, in a permanent comatose state that will never be able to bear duties, but they unquestionably have rights. Like, it would be absurd, and no one on this side of the aisle, like, we have, people that filed amicus briefs on our side were pioneers in the same-sex marriage equality movement. We have folks that are Supreme Court justices from other countries like India and South Africa. We have literally the South African Supreme Court justice, former Supreme Court justice, filed a brief in support of Happy in our case, who was hailed by Nelson Mandela for his, human rights work and all this stuff. And we've got the other side saying, you're denigrating human rights by saying that Happy should be a person, and that if you say that Happy can be a person, then it puts in jeopardy people like the comatose individuals and the children. And it doesn't make any sense, because the law can and should recognize the rights of all of the individuals we're talking about here. There's no reason to denigrate other humans just because animals are also, or at least elephants, and Happy in particular, also are self-determining and have an interest in liberty. So we're grappling with this third department decision that basically has now been relied upon by the first department in this elephant case, in our Happy case, to say, oh, Happy can't be a legal person because she also can't bear duties, and she also is not a human. And we're saying that precedent, and that followed us all the way to Connecticut, and this rule that you have to be a legal person requires duties, and that you are a human. We're arguing that is such a fundamentally wrong standard, because it was never the law. And that's the standard that actually puts humans in jeopardy, because there was never before a rule that said you have to be able to shoulder duties to have rights. And now, because of this New York ruling, that's their decision that says that. So we didn't say you have to have duties. Humans don't have to have duties to have rights. That's their ruling. So we're grappling with overturning that decision in particular. So there's kind of like, in presenting my case, I have to, and we only have like 10 minutes and we have to reserve 2 minutes for rebuttal. So it's kind of like figuring out the right strategy of we have to overturn this one case, but we also have really compelling reasons separate from that why the court needs to independently recognize Happy's right to bodily liberty. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question about the prior cases, that's basically what they held. And I guess I should back up by saying that the courts have been really, in New York, looking at this backwards. They're saying we need to define person and then figure out if Happy has the right. That's not how personhood works. Personhood is a consequence of having a legal right. So once you have the right, you are a person for the purpose of that right, but not necessarily for any other rights. So a perfect example is slavery. After Black slaves had been freed, and there was either by a habeas corpus petition or later like the 13th Amendment, or state constitutions, they had all the rights under the common law, but they didn't necessarily have citizenship rights. Like under the Constitution, there's a Connecticut case where the opponents were using the exact same arguments that are used against Happy about the social contract. Slaves aren't part of the social contract, therefore they cannot have rights. And the court said that doesn't matter that they're not part of the social contract. They have rights under the common law. So we're using those cases not to compare elephants to slaves, but to compare the law and say that there's law and precedent. The very history of the writ of habeas corpus has been used to challenge unjust imprisonments that challenge the status quo and that break the barrier of cultural norms. It was used by wives to get free from their husbands in English common law when wives were considered chattel. They had no other remedy at law. There was no violation of any statutes. It was pure common law. I think the King's Bench in England issued the first writ for a wife in like the 1600s. And then you have its use for children to change custody if they were in abusive custody or households. Of course, I brought up the slave cases as an example of a cutting edge use for the writ. So the lack of precedent doesn't and the inquiry. And in fact that the very body of law that uses habeas corpus in these novel situations where there's no other remedy at law is itself precedent for its use here.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to see that these arguments in opposition, run so deep in our history, that 200 years ago, people who want to cling to that status quo are saying the same thing. And I think hopefully those arguments will fall away in decades to come, just as they did then. So yeah. And I wondered too, if you could speak to like the New York Court of Appeals, perhaps I'm misstating it, but unique role, like what the New York's highest court, how do they come into that whole process, and what makes it so important that they are considering Happy's case, which some of our supporters know they only take, I think it's less than 5% of cases that request to be heard. So yeah, could you speak to that part of it?
Absolutely, yes, this is such a big deal. When I was in law school, the research that I was doing, besides the equality research, and then I did a paper on manumission, and I did a lot of deep dives on habeas corpus, but was actually doing those deep dives on habeas corpus state by state by state. And we had like 15 kind of factors we were looking at, like, do they, can we even get to the highest court? Because our goal, our goal is to get, the animals to sanctuary, but like, it is also, of course, to change the law. And you do that by getting to the highest court. And we knew this wasn't going to happen overnight. We knew this was going to take a while. And so, it's amazing that it's been like pretty much like a decade since we filed our first case. And we finally have made it to the Court of Appeals. And this was after, we've asked them to take our case a couple times. And the last time that we had sought review, which was in our chimpanzee case, we had Judge Fahey, who was a Court of Appeals member, who wrote a really compelling concurring opinion for us. And he said, we're not taking the case. And the reason was procedural. It had to do with this like filing successive petitions. But he wrote this concurrence that said, I don't know if we were even right to deny them review the first time around, and said that the ruling, about the ruling about duties and responsibilities, that they have to shoulder those in order to have rights, is completely out of step with New York law. So he outlines that. He talks about how chimpanzees are autonomous and intelligent and that they should have rights. And so we used a lot of his points in our elephant case and Happy's case to ask the Court of Appeals to take it. And I have to think that his views have helped shape his former colleagues' views too, insofar as that they took it. We don't want to opine or to speculate too much as to why they took it, because it could just be, and I don't want to like dampen the mood, but it could just be like, we're so sick of these people, like stop petitioning, we'll take the case just to like, chew you up and spit you out, and then we'll just go on our merry way to our, our California case. But I don't think that's the case. I hope, the way that Judge Fahey took it so seriously, at a Court of Appeals level, we haven't had that in the intermediate courts. We've had that in the lower courts, in the trial court. Our trial court judge, Judge Allison Tuitt, was prepared to rule in our favor, and she found that the scientific evidence was extremely compelling for transferring Happy from her lonely 1 acre pen to a sanctuary, and said the only reason really why I can't rule in your favor is this dumb Court of Appeal, this ruling from the first department or third department that says, actually it's really both now, but that says that you can't bear rights and duties to have rights. So or that you have to have duties to have rights. So so we have trial court judges that were willing to rule in our favor. So I do think that we have a chance here. Yeah,
absolutely. And actually thinking about those 10 minutes, you might have 12 minutes, hopefully longer, because if I understand it correctly too, the judges can ask questions that might.
Yeah.
So it's gonna all go very quickly. And so what is the best case scenario like? And you've argued, I think 30 federal cases, I don't know how many total, but yeah, just from your perspective as a lawyer, what will you be looking for that day, like from the judges? What do we want them to be doing?
Yeah, and that's a great point, Lauren. Actually, I just got back from Alabama last two weeks ago arguing a church-state separation case in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And in our federal cases, we usually get 15 minutes, and they let us go way over. And it was because the judges were, grilling me. And it wasn't, it was an important case because it was the separation of church and state. But it wasn't like the quintessential like elephant case. So I share your view that I would like to think that they'll give us more time, and that I'd like to think that they have a lot of questions and want to keep us there so that, they're really squared away on what the law is. So what I would be looking for is exactly that, is like, are they interested? If they're not asking questions at all, that would be a little concerning. If they out the gate ask me questions that are like, just reveal that they really don't get it, it will make me kind of shift. I might try to shift my focus a little bit to try to back up and, okay, like this is, we're here, not here yet, but I've watched a couple Court of Appeals arguments. Luckily the New York Court of Appeals has their oral arguments on YouTube. So because I'm really familiar just with the federal courts of appeals and not so much with the state, New York State court judges. Steve has done all of our arguments so far. So I really been just not trying to overanalyze them, but just understand like how often they ask questions, like what kind of questions they want. I was watching one last night in the background where out the gate, they were like, what's the standard of review? And I was like, oh, what's our standard of review? I'm like, I know it, but it's one of those things that's so fundamental. Like I don't want to lose sight of something really like basic because I'm so in the weeds about like this ancient common law and like, so I have to kind of keep pivoting back to what could be asked and what, we want to paint a picture that's compelling too.
Right. And I don't even know what standard of review means, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have to. But I wonder, your YouTube must be dominated right now then by videos of court proceedings. And then I know that you've also been looking at a lot of videos of elephants who found sanctuaries. We hope happy will. So in terms of your prep, and then also how you're feeling right now about everything, what you're thinking about, what has it been like taking in both of those kind of streams and whatever else you've been doing to prep?
Yeah, thanks. Steve had asked me to take this on not like last minute in the sense that I was nowhere on my horizon. And I was already prepping pretty deep into my 11th Circuit case. So I was a little bit like, it was like without hesitation, I would love to do this. This is like, again, like the 5-year-old in me is screaming because this is like such an amazing opportunity. But it's also really like devastating. And it's really like, unlike my church state separation cases where I feel like this is devastating because our country's going down my views on that. But like, but when it comes to animals, like, it's really like, I didn't really have to internalize a lot of the science before about them because frankly, I felt like it was enough. Like, I know enough about animals to know this is wrong. Like, you could be 6 years old and go to the zoo and know that that's wrong. So it hasn't, I kind of am aware of, how we can get emotionally burnt out. And I didn't want to, throughout the years at NhRP, really sink too deeply into like the suffering that's going on because it's harder to do the work. But at the same time, I'm like, now I really need to know like all things about elephants. I want to see what the sanctuaries look like and what the like what the conditions look like for elephants abroad, what they're like in zoos. And so I watched a couple rescue videos. There's one that's really compelling. I ended up getting like the YouTube like ad-free thing. I finally like gave for that. And I have it on my TV just in the background now with like all things elephants or the Court of Appeals. And I can't believe how much I've learned through doing that, just about elephants and how extremely like emotionally intelligent they are. Like there's a video, I think in Love and Bananas documentary, again, just deep dive on all the documentaries, but some of these ones are really sad about like the elephants that are used in performances in Asia, in those kind of like countries where they're like in, like I can't think of the word right now, but they are like, there's this video where the elephant, there's like a dead cat on the road and like all the cars and the humans are just kind of like going over it, and the elephant sees the cat and goes like all the way around. I think this was one of Lex.
Oh, right.
She was going to rescue this elephant. And so And she's like, I think that they're way more, emotionally intelligent than us. And there's the people that work closest with elephants, I think that they're more intelligent and more, at least emotionally intelligent than we are. So there was stuff like that just, I couldn't stop crying because it's just like, oh my God, like they're this sentimental, and we have her, like, where's the humanity? So I've learned a lot, but I think the most useful thing, or one of the more useful things, was watching the transfer videos, the successful transfers of elephants from zoos to the sanctuaries that we're trying to get elephants to. The one from the Toronto Zoo to Paws here in California, that's where I really saw, because I actually haven't seen Paws yet. Courtney and I were going to go right before it closed because of COVID. So I did not, even being here in Northern California, Paws is one of the Northern California sanctuaries. I see rolling hills out here, but I've never really internalized that the elephants would be able to roam around on hills, whatever hills they want. And seeing these 3 Toronto elephants going around in circles in their stupid little pen, and all these people just staring at them, it's gut wrenching. I saw, Mickey had a video recently where she was at the Bronx Zoo, and I got to see. She was on my YouTube thing, but that was one of my glimpses into the Bronx Zoo, because I haven't been inside, and to see the difference of a zoo environment versus the closest thing that they could have to a natural environment, it's like night and day. And you see the zookeepers who were first in Toronto, and Alaska, I think too, that were like, no, you can't tell us what to do. We don't want to move our elephants. And even the trainers and the people on the ground thought that this would be a bad idea. And then they were at the release and were crying tears of joy, because how could you not see the difference? So I think for folks that are on the fence, or really want to see the remarkable difference, and then you watch the elephants immediately bond with the other elephants. And that's the other really big injustice with Happy's case, is that she's alone. And elephants, especially, like I said earlier, female elephants in particular, are extremely they have permanent bonds. They're affectionate species. They like to touch each other a lot. They play together a lot. It's not like depriving a cat of their bodily liberty, or a species that's more solitary. We're taking a very cognitively complex species that needs other elephants and putting her away from that. So I think Bob Barker said, I don't care how well you treat an elephant and what you feed them, a solitary elephant is a miserable elephant.
Right.
And that's really our case.
Yeah, and that sort of, not that Bob Barker was thinking this way, but that sort of gets at the difference between welfare and rights, because how they're treated, their veterinary care and all that stuff, that the Bronx Zoo cites as Happy is happy where she is because look at her blood tests.
Right.
It is insufficient. It doesn't get to the core injustice of the fact that she's there at all. And we know too that they conveniently totally ignore all the stories of elephants who've been released to sanctuaries and thrived, with histories that are even more traumatic than Happy's. And so their position is that, yeah, Happy's happy where she is, we know best. So they're still clinging again to that narrative. And actually the question we get asked most often, I'd say, is why won't the Bronx Zoo let her go? I don't know if people are asking somewhat rhetorically in frustration, how could this be? We know what elephants need to survive and thrive. Why are they doing this? Especially when they themselves said that they'd close the elephant exhibit once one or more of the elephants had died, which seems their acknowledgement that it's wrong to keep an elephant alone. And yet that's what they're doing. And they're doing that as well to Patty, who is held separately. And so they have all sorts of reasons for that too, of course, but and we know Patty is suffering just the same way as Happy would be. And I'll just add too that we filed suit on behalf of Happy initially, because at that time, Patty had a companion, Maxine, and so we were focused on Happy as the elephant who was held alone. And we were always going to come back for Patty and Maxine. It wasn't that our lawsuit was focused, for certain reason, it was focused only on Happy, but I just want to make sure everyone knows that we won't leave Patty behind in the exhibit, no matter what, nor Happy, whatever happens in the case, we're going to keep fighting for their freedom. Anyway, my question for you though is, could you speak a little bit more to what the Bronx Zoo and the Wildlife Conservation Society are arguing, and also the other arguments against us that have come up, which I want to laugh at, but because they're absurd. But anyway, that we are going to take down the dairy industry in New York if we're successful, that we want to take away everyone's pets, that sort of thing. So could you speak a bit to the opposition more broadly speaking and how you conceive of that?
Totally. So first of all, I think since I was on the track of those videos, the YouTube videos, the one in particular that I'm talking about, I think it was like Canadian TV. If you just like Google the Toronto elephant pause transfer or something, it should be there. But they interview the Alaskan zookeeper, like director, like who the equivalent of who Breheny is in our case, the director of the zoo. And he was like, the reason why I was keeping my elephants, like when asked to move them to sanctuary, and he was really stubborn about it, was he just was like, I simply didn't want to be told what to do. And it's really hard to understand the psychology of this. And they try to get at it in some of this documentary, like where they're like some people are like, they see them as prized possessions and they're just unwilling to part with that. But frankly, like as a California judge said, and this is not my words, but it's delusional. Like the zookeepers that claim that their zoos are better than a sanctuary are delusional. That was a 2012 California case. And so I don't know, but I think it's could be a combination of stubbornness. Dr. Joyce Poole testified in our case that the Wildlife Conservation Society has wonderful, qualified elephant scientists. None of them submitted affidavits in this case. All they have in response to our 5, world-renowned elephant scientists is their own employees. Our scientists are independent. Their scientists are not scientists. It's a veterinarian and who's responsible for all the zoo animals. And then you've got the director of the programs. So and I think another director. So they're not even elephant scientists. And so their opinions really don't matter in a court of law. They matter maybe to someone, but they don't rebut the scientific evidence that you have an autonomous being who's suffering immensely because of the deprivation of being with other elephants and the space and all the other things. And they're coming back saying, no, we check her blood, we give her food, we check her toenails. And and as Poole testified, nowhere in their affidavits does it even say that Happy is found to be healthy, really. I mean, her feet don't look healthy to Dr. Joyce Poole. She's engaged in stereotypic behavior. She might have TB, or she could have had TB at one point because Patty had TB. So this isn't even, they're not even necessarily accurate in their assessment that she's even healthy. Her psychological health is obviously not good. And I think the only statement they even made to her emotion or her psychological well-being was that she's really distressed when they shuffle her around in between, within the Bronx Zoo, which just is that just furthers the point she should not be there. So so I think it's I don't know the psychology of it, but yeah, the amicus briefs, we've got amicus briefs now, which we didn't have. We've always had a few folks, really important, scholars and people that have supported us at the lower court levels, Lawrence Tribe being one of them. But at this level, at the Court of Appeals, I mean, it's just remarkable. I mean, it's made me really emotional reading through those, especially, when we have judges, former Supreme Court judges, hailed by, again, Nelson Mandela saying habeas corpus is proper here. When we have habeas corpus experts saying habeas corpus is proper here, there is no moral, scientific, political, theological debate. We have religions. As a church state litigator, I work with a lot of religious groups as allies, but rarely do I see sort of religious unanimity. It's usually the progressive religions and our groups, and then the other side. But in this case, there's religions that have filed, Buddhists, Catholic theologians, I think Eastern Orthodox, Jewish scholars. Everyone is saying our share. The Buddhist brief was really, really sweet. Very simple, very Buddhist, but I loved it. I mean, it was in its simplicity. And you have these briefs that are saying our shared collective religious texts all support the freedom and recognizing the right for Happy. So there's no ideological debate here, which is really amazing. All we have is these profiteers, the dairy and the ag and the big pockets coming in and saying, this is not a court issue, this is for the legislature. And it's kind of gee, I wonder why they want it in the legislature. That's where they have lobbying power. And that's why it's vital that the court understands that its role is the administration of justice, and that the legislature gets to do what it does, but this court doesn't get to take, it doesn't take lobbying dollars. Like this is not the place for the New York Milk Bureau or whatever to come in and say Happy doesn't get a right to bodily liberty.
Right, right. And we expected all that too. It's not like it came as any surprise that we get that form of opposition too. So yeah, and my dog is actually right next to me, growling at the delivery person. So hopefully he doesn't. I'll mute myself if he does that. But I wanted to ask you, we know that a ruling in Happy's favor would change Happy's life. What would it do for the animal rights movement at large in the US and abroad? That's not too big a question, and I know you can't answer it totally, but what are your thoughts there?
I think it would be huge. We have rulings now from several foreign countries that have said that have granted habeas corpus to non-human animals. There was Cecilia, the chimpanzee in Argentina, and we have Kavan, the elephant that was released in Pakistan through a writ of mandamus, not exactly the same. There was Estrelita, the monkey, that was recently released. But these were all, these are, America is still seen kind of internationally, despite all of the things, as a leader in a lot of rights-based, movements. And it would be immensely significant, I think, with a ripple effect if a high court in the United States recognized Happy's right. It doesn't mean that other elephants will immediately be free. It still is going to require a new case and resources and argument and time. And so the notion that the floodgates will open, like how many people can even file, this takes so much work, and it has to be case by case. So I think it will have precedential effect, just like, these landmark decisions we've talked about, where it became a maxim under the common law after James Somerset's case in England that slavery is so odious that nothing could support it under the common law. Here, we're hoping that a similar maxim, comes out of this, that it doesn't matter. It's not that it's freeing all the elephants, but at least it's precedent to take to another case.
Right. Thank you. That is super helpful. I'm going to press pause on my questions and look at the questions in the chat now. Let me see if there's some in there. Hang on a second. Okay. Well, I can't see them. Mickey, if there are questions there, I cannot see them.
Not yet, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them now in the chat. I think it's open for everyone now.
Well, I still got more, so I'll keep going until they come in.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, and actually before, Monica, I keep launching questions at you. Is there anything that I want to give you space to just say what else is on your mind right now as you're preparing, and yeah.
I've been really grateful to have Spencer Lowe in particular, helping prep with me. We are up till like last night. I mean, I'm up late doing the prep stuff myself, but he's on East Coast time, and so we were, I think, on the phone pretty much all this week, up until 10 my time here in California. And so it's 1 a.m. there, and it's I keep Spencer, you can go to bed, I can do it myself, but just going through the materials, because I, being alone, I can be talking to myself, but not having someone else there to discuss it with and go through the materials. It's been really helpful. And of course, Jake has also been on the calls, but I just wanted to make sure I acknowledged them because they've been really helpful. And especially with getting me the materials. Oh my God. I in my other job, I've been kind of a one-man show for a lot of different parts of it, and just being able to to have them send me all the stuff that I needed organized with labels on it. I was just I would have easily they've made my life a lot easier and made this possible. So
I can imagine they're both super organized.
Yes. Yeah. I'm I am not I have the papers the second I just put them all over the ground, and then Spencer's open it to page 12 of the AZA brief, and I'm which one is it? So it's yeah, I feel calmer knowing that someone has the stuff straight. Yeah,
I love that. And actually I think people might not realize too the sheer volume of labor hours on the one hand. So if you want to sketch out what that looks like a little more.
I mean, like I have my briefs here for my other case because I needed to get them out of my space, but this is for just like, this was like a fraction of what I had for my 11th Circuit case. And this is pretty much like what our, I'm like, am I wearing pants? Yeah. This is what we, you know, this is what it looks like upstairs, like, but all over my room. Because I basically just don't leave that room now. Like, it's just, that's where I sleep, eat, and do NhRP prep stuff.
So
yeah.
that's you taking a highlighter and tabs and all that to an immense stack of papers, which are what court filings, all the court filings in Happy's case. Yeah, wow. And in terms of what you're doing with the other lawyers, like there's Spencer and Jake, and then all along the way in this case, like what is the legal team doing that we can't always see? And I get glimpses of it, and it's intense, I know. So what, can you sketch that out a bit? What happened?
I mean, it's a lot of like, we've had kind of our like, I don't know, it's, you know, like the court, like Liddy and Steve and myself, and then usually like, you know, some other lawyers, we get really like into, not like debates, but like we can get really heated about these things, but it's really useful to kind of get like, when you have like one sort of tricky issue and three of us see it kind of differently, to really like hash that out, because if we're seeing it differently, then the judges will. And so even if it's like something really small and someone from the outside, like I remember when we would have the film crew around for the HBO documentary, like they were like like they would be filming us for hours, you know, like 10 hours a day, and they would be like just floored that we were still on like the subject of some nuanced point about like one little like micro rule in like the rule procedure book, but like for 2 days we might have been discussing that, and they're like, I don't even know if anything is useful in this for like our documentary, but like we're really granular, and it's because we like want to understand the outer reach of what we could be asked. And that's why I'm like trying to watch the YouTube videos and stuff, is to make sure I don't overlook something simple, like what's the standard of review.
Yeah, that. Okay. And I actually see quite a few questions come in. Let me see how many we can squeeze in. Sally Lee asked, do we see a global shift towards honoring animal rights? And I know you mentioned the cases of Cecilia and Kavan, and so whether you want to answer that like within or beyond the courts, what are your thoughts there? I think we say yes, like absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. There's a global trend, and one of the more it's like the Indian Supreme Court, I think, granted like pretty much like all like animals rights, or like the Indian government, like I forgot kind of how it works, but one of those rights that I thought was just like so, I don't know, compelling, was just like birds have a fundamental right to fly, and they like freed the caged birds. And it's like, it doesn't have to be like a monumental right for the animal. It's just like, what is their species needs, and the right to be free to fly or something just seemed really, you know, obvious almost. So I think that, yeah, absolutely other countries are getting it. And I think other countries and judges are getting the connection between how we treat our animals and how we treat humans. It's not that the inclusion of animals into our legal system threatens humans. It really helps humans, because, you know, being compassionate towards animals is being compassionate towards humans. I mean, there's
right. And it's about what kind of future do we want for life on Earth,
right.
And realizing that we need a paradigm shift. We need to do things differently on a fundamental level under the law and otherwise. So yeah.
I see a good question, Lauren.
Do it.
So Susan asks, and hi, how are you? Thanks for joining us. So she asks, I know, Monica, you only have 10 minutes, and you spoke about how compelling watching those videos were for you. So are you able to, in that time, paint a picture for the judges? Do you have the time to like tell that story or show a clip between the difference between where Happy is and this 2,000 acre?
Yeah, good question. I've been actually trying to grapple with that and figure out how. We won't be able to show a video, but there's nothing that would bar me from like mentioning the video. So it's like, I think if I just, you know, find a specific name of that movie, I know Love and Bananas was the one, I'm pretty sure was the one where you see the elephant walking around the cat. But I'll definitely be mentioning the difference between the two. But I think I heard one of the judges say in a YouTube video. I think there was like a swearing in ceremony in New York Court of Appeals, but I think that they said something like, we're judges, but we're also humans, and we have access to TV, and we watch the news, and we watch things, so we're aware of what goes on. And so I don't think it would be improper, like, to allude to the YouTube videos, or like the court can readily see the difference between a zoo and a sanctuary by Googling this thing, you know. So I think maybe doing something in that way. But of course, we're going to be meeting in New York before my argument, where I'll have a chance to talk with Steve and the other lawyers, and we can really hash out like what they think, you know, how could I mention that? Because I'll probably be coming to them with like all the things that I think, you know, like this is what I plan to bring up, and you know, Steve might think, you know, let's save the YouTube stuff for later. I don't want to say that, like, I don't really know, but I do think that I don't think that anyone could watch those videos and then rule against us and then be able to sleep at night. That's how I feel personally, but maybe not, but.
Yeah, and I see too, Bruce in the comments points out there right now 2 elephants are being transported, I think from Argentina to the elephant sanctuary in Brazil. And so if Happy's ordered released to a sanctuary, all that fear mongering the Bronx Zoo is doing around, like, you know, transport, all that will be worked out and conducted with the utmost care given to what Happy needs at that level too. And I'm just going to squeeze in also a legal question around that. Like, if the court does rule in our favor and Happy is ordered released, I'm trying to look for who asked this, but I think it was someone in the chat asked, like, can the zoo appeal it? Like, if the court does order that, is that it? Is that's what will happen?
Yeah, we'd probably have the court remit it back down to the lower court to decide which of the sanctuaries, because there's really 2. There's the Tennessee Elephant Sanctuary that's closer, and then there's Paws out here in California, which are really the 2 main ones. But the Toronto elephants came all the way over from Toronto to Paws very successfully. Joyce Poole testified that all of the elephant transfers that they've had have been extremely successful, that even though it might cause like any sort of like, not even like distress, but she was saying that like the inevitable stress that happens during a transfer, they've never seen any permanent effects from that. And like, it's so overridden by their ultimate freedom. I think someone said something on the video, I think when they were freeing the or transferring the Alaskan elephant, like that, I think it was not Minnie, Maggie maybe. Anyway, they were saying like, if she stayed where she was, like she would die anyway. Like she wasn't like, there was no hope for her where she was. So this is the best thing we can do. But the transfers really are not, you know, they're making a big mountain out of a molehill. They've done this a lot of times, and it's not going to be the most pleasant trip, but like the end result is so much more worth it. Like that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Mickey, we still have a couple minutes, right?
Yeah, we do. So I see a question from Linda. She asks, can you file suit personally against the head of the Bronx Zoo using trophy laws?
We've seen some of those laws come up, but they just don't address this issue. Like really, like the fact there's really just no statutes that help us. And that's kind of our point here. It's like they keep kind of like hailing the fact that we don't cite any statute or regulation, you know, that they're violating. And it's like, that underscores the problem. Like there's nothing, that the law is so inadequate that it's allowing you to detain an elephant in like solitary isolation, like, or confinement. Like that's just a huge gap in the law. So big deal that we have the common law. The common law is an independent body of law that the New York courts have the authority and the duty to upkeep, to recognize Happy's rights. So.
Yeah, and I just want to add too to that, because I see questions in the comments too, people asking how they can help wanting to come join us in Albany, which we very much welcome. So thinking about just the common law too, what that's meant to do, why is it so important that we have this support? And I want people to feel good about their support, because it really does matter in a common law case, perhaps uniquely, but could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the common law is like one of the factors, for instance, like our change.org petition, which I think now has, or Happy's change.org, I think has like 1.5 million or 4 million. Like that is a statistic that we cite in our cases, because the courts, part of like the upkeep of the common law is like changing norms in society. And how does society see elephants now? It's not the end all be all factor, you know, they still have to, it's like, in other words, if society was like, no, we don't like elephants, like that wouldn't preclude us from doing this. But the fact that society is here and no one, you know, like I said, we have all the humans, like all the good human, like the humans are on our side, and it's like the corporation, like the non-human persons are really on the other side, kind of oddly. But yeah, like, so the change.org really matters, because that's a number we can cite that says like, this is the will of the people. Like I said, like the amicus briefs, educating people about elephants, like I said, like these kind of videos and stuff, like informing yourself to inform others, I think can be really useful, because people sometimes don't, like I was showing my mom these videos and stuff, and she was really moved, and I was telling her friends, like, did you know elephants are like this? I mean, they're just such amazing creatures. And I think education like is such a huge component of it, and the zoos do such a disservice by presenting animals this way, and by, you know, telling kids that this is what this is how they act. You don't see them, you know, doing high fives and all the stuff that elephants do in the wild. Yeah, so I guess what all of this is to say that like when we do action alerts, when Lauren sends out an action alert about like signing, or Courtney or whoever is sending out something about signing our petitions, like those are so important, and we use those in our court cases. And I think that they're going to have a lot of sway in this case and in our California case.
Yeah, absolutely. And just even like people standing with us in the courtrooms,
yes,
courthouse steps that day, like what do the judges have a sense of that? Like what do we imagine would be the impact of that?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the courts are very attuned to what the people of their state want. And I think that those, you know, for one, I mean, they give us the ability to like show people, like, you know, like I post those pictures on my my Instagram, like people care. It says people care, and they care so much they're willing to take a train, come up here with their signs, like during a pandemic. Like this is, I think that message is not lost. And especially, you know, like I love the ones with like the kids, like the signs, you know, I think Lek and her group did one. But I mean, even if you can't go, just showing your support through those things, I think has a ripple effect. Other people want to get involved, and the more people that want to help and save elephants, I think we'll get there kind of collectively.
Yeah, beautifully stated. And we're going to wrap up now, but actually on that note, when we send around this YouTube video and when we post it on YouTube, we'll include in the comments links out to how people can help. And then that's the pause video you mentioned of the transfer, all that stuff will be in there. And you can find everything you need at freehappynow.com, and that's where we'll be live streaming the arguments themselves. So Monica before the judges, you'll be able to see that at freehappynow.com. But again, if you're able to come to Albany with us, we would love to see you there. Rally with us beforehand, hear remarks from Steve on why this moment's so important, all that, some exciting stuff there. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll try to attend to the questions in the chat and follow-ups too. So, and thank you, Monica. I know you're so busy. We'll let you get back to that huge stack of papers.
Thanks. I'd rather stay here with you guys though, but I'll go back to my work.
All right, good luck, and see you soon.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.